The world isn't split between friends and strangers. There's a darker gradient most people refuse to acknowledge. While you're busy trying to win everyone over, playing nice and making excuses for those who repeatedly harm you, someone is calculating your downfall. Not everyone who smiles at you wishes you well. Some want to see you extinguished, your light, your potential, your very existence. I'm not here to coddle you with comfortable lies. I'm here to tear away the veil of delusion you've wrapped around yourself like a security blanket. The truth isn't pretty, but it will keep you alive. It will preserve your dignity. It will save your future. You think you're being mature by ignoring the signs. You believe you're taking the high road by making excuses for those who secretly plot against you. This isn't wisdom, it's willful blindness. And it's going to cost you everything if you don't wake up. The ancient Stoics understood human nature in ways our comfort-obsessed modern psychology often sanitizes. Seneca, who served under the volatile Emperor Nero, knew intimately what it meant to live alongside those who might call for your death any day. You must know, he wrote, that when a man cannot hurt you, he nevertheless wishes to do so. But Seneca also recognized a crucial distinction between ordinary hatred, which is common, and the deadly focused intent that marks someone as your genuine adversary. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, surrounded by potential assassins and betrayers, wrote daily reminders to himself. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. Was this pessimism? No, it was clear-eyed realism that allowed him to navigate a dangerous world without being crushed by naivety. Let's get painfully real about something. Right now, there are people in your life pretending to be neutral or even friendly who secretly hope for your destruction. They don't just dislike you. They don't just avoid you. They actively calculate how to diminish you, destroy your reputation, sabotage your happiness, and in the most extreme cases, though more common than you want to believe, they fantasize about your complete removal from the equation of life. Does that make you uncomfortable? Good. Discomfort is the beginning of awakening. Before we dive into the 5 unmistakable signs that someone wants you eradicated, not merely disliked, I want you to sit with a question. Let it burn through your defenses. Who have you been making excuses for? Whose repeated patterns of hostility have you been minimizing, rationalizing, or dismissing? I want names and faces in your mind right now. Breathe into that discomfort. Don't run from it. The Stoics taught that wisdom begins with clear perception, seeing things as they truly are, not as we wish them to be. Epictetus, born a slave and later a great philosopher, instructed, don't explain why something is a problem. Focus on identifying the real threats. Your first task is perception without delusion. The first sign someone doesn't merely dislike you, but wishes for your erasure is systematic undermining. This goes beyond occasional criticism or competition. This is coordinated, patient, and deliberate action to remove your foundations of support. They don't just disagree with you in meetings, they build coalitions against your ideas before you've even spoken. They don't just compete with you for opportunities, they ensure you never hear about them in the first place. They don't just withdraw their support, they quietly convince others to do the same. Think about it. Who consistently positions themselves not just as your alternative, but as your replacement? Who works not just to elevate themselves, but specifically to eliminate your position, your voice, your very place at the table? The average person, blinded by an addiction to being liked, will rationalize this behavior. Maybe they're just ambitious. Perhaps they don't realize what they're doing. I'm probably being too sensitive. Stop lying to yourself. Your intuition has been screaming while your conscious mind covers its ears, singing comforting lullabies of denial. Zeno, founder of Stoicism, taught that emotions are judgments, powerful assessments about what matters. That knot in your stomach when certain people enter the room isn't paranoia. It's your deepest wisdom recognizing threat. The question isn't whether your unease is justified, it's why you keep dismissing your own internal alarm system. Consider the person who has systematically removed your supports. They don't just disagree with your perspectives, they make sure others question your competence. They don't just compete with you, they reshape the entire landscape so the rules no longer accommodate your strengths. They don't just withdraw, they isolate you from potential allies. This isn't normal conflict. This is existential hostility. Take a moment now. Breathe deeply. The recognition of truth, however disturbing, is the beginning of power. You cannot defend against what you refuse to see. The Stoics understood that the first step toward wisdom is accepting reality without emotional distortion. Not to become paranoid, but to become clear. Not to hate your adversaries, but to recognize them accurately. But shouldn't I just focus on the positive? Aren't I attracting negativity by acknowledging these dynamics? This spiritual bypassing masquerading as wisdom is the very delusion that has left you vulnerable. The truly positive path isn't denial, it's accurate assessment followed by strategic response. Your strength isn't measured by how well you pretend threats don't exist, but by how effectively you navigate them while maintaining your integrity. The second sign someone wants you eliminated, rather than merely disliked, is information weaponization. Pay close attention because this one operates in shadows and uses your own words, vulnerabilities, and past against you with surgical precision. This person doesn't just remember your mistakes, they catalog them. They don't just notice your vulnerabilities, they document them. They don't just observe your patterns, they study them for exploitable weaknesses. When ordinary people collect information about you, they do it casually, remembering bits and pieces that interest them. When someone weaponizes information, they collect it with intent. They remember every vulnerability you've revealed, every mistake you've made, every insecurity you've shown not to understand you, but to compile ammunition. Think about that person who somehow always brings up your failures at precisely the moment when it will damage you most. The one who innocently mentions your past error exactly when you're being considered for an opportunity. The one who knows exactly which insecurity to trigger that will send you spiraling for days. This isn't coincidence. This isn't ordinary social friction. This is calculated psychological warfare. Epictetus warned, "It is not what happens to you, but how you respond to it that matters." But he also understood that wisdom requires recognizing patterns of intention in others' actions. You cannot respond appropriately to what you refuse to accurately name. The information weaponizer will present themselves as concerned. "I'm just worried about how others might perceive you." They'll frame their actions as helpful. "I thought you would want to know what people are saying." They'll position themselves as neutral messengers when they are, in fact, the architects of your undoing. Notice how they selectively deploy damaging information for maximum impact. They aren't expressing random thoughts, they're executing precision strikes against your reputation, relationships, and self-confidence. The average person still trapped in the delusion that everyone fundamentally wants harmony makes excuses. Maybe they didn't realize how that would affect me. Perhaps they thought they were helping. They probably didn't mean it that way. Stop. Just stop. You're not being charitable, you're being willfully blind. The Stoic philosopher Musonius Rufus taught that we must train ourselves to want what is actually good for us rather than what merely appears good. What appears good is believing everyone has your best interests at heart. What is actually good is developing the discernment to recognize those who systematically work against you. Take a moment. Breathe into the discomfort of this recognition. Truth, however painful, is the foundation of freedom. Now ask yourself, who consistently uses your words, actions, and vulnerabilities against you with precise timing? Who seems to have an encyclopedic memory for your missteps, but conveniently forgets their own? Who somehow always has relevant information about you that undermines your position exactly when you're gaining ground? That person doesn't just dislike you, they're mapping your destruction. The third sign transcends everyday antipathy and reveals deadly intent, identity assassination. This isn't about disagreeing with your ideas or disliking your personality. This is a coordinated effort to erase the essence of who you are in the minds of others. When someone merely dislikes you, they might avoid you or criticize specific behaviors. When someone wants you eradicated, they attack the very foundation of your identity. They don't just say you made a mistake, they frame you as fundamentally incompetent. They don't just suggest you were insensitive in a moment, they paint you as inherently toxic. They don't just point out a flaw, they redefine you by it. Notice the language they use about you to others. That's just how they are. They've always been this way. This is who they really are beneath the surface. They're not describing actions, they're defining essence. They're not identifying behaviors, they're pronouncing immutable character judgments. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane." Yet when someone engages in identity assassination against you, they specifically aim to isolate you, to position you outside the community, to make others question your basic sanity and worth. Pay attention to how they introduce doubt about your core competencies, your foundational character traits, your essential nature. They don't say, "I disagree with their approach." They say, "They fundamentally lack judgment." They don't say, "I see this differently." They say, "They're simply not capable of understanding." This isn't normal conflict. This is existential erasure. The identity assassin works to ensure that when others hear your name, their first association isn't with your strengths, contributions, or humanity, but with manufactured flaws and distortions. They're not just criticizing you, they're rewriting who you are in the social consciousness. And you, still desperately clinging to the belief that everyone operates with basic good intentions, make excuses. They're entitled to their opinion. Maybe I haven't shown my best side to them. I should try harder to win them over. This isn't wisdom. This is self-betrayal disguised as maturity. Seneca observed that the greatest remedy for anger is delay. But he wasn't advocating permanent inaction, he was recommending strategic patience while you formulate an appropriate response. The appropriate response to identity assassination is not endless understanding, but clear-eyed recognition followed by boundaries of steel. Pause now. Let yourself feel the weight of this recognition. The person who systematically attacks your identity doesn't just want to hurt you, they want to eliminate the very concept of you from the social landscape. Consider who has been working to redefine you to others, who speaks about your character rather than your actions, who seems invested in ensuring others see you not just as flawed, but as fundamentally broken. This isn't casual dislike. This is existential opposition. The fourth sign that someone desires your complete removal goes beyond normal social friction into something far more sinister: strategic isolation. This isn't mere social awkwardness or competitive positioning. This is a deliberate campaign to cut you off from every support system that sustains you. When someone merely dislikes you, they might avoid being in your social circles. When someone wants you erased, they work methodically to ensure you have no circles left. They don't just remove themselves from your presence, they remove your presence from every space of significance. Notice their pattern. They don't just disagree with you in group settings, they make your participation itself seem problematic. They don't just compete with you for relationships, they systematically turn those relationships against you. They don't just withdraw their support, they convince others that supporting you reflects poorly on them. The strategic isolator works on multiple fronts simultaneously. They whisper concerns about you to colleagues. I'm worried about their stability. They plant seeds of doubt with your friends. Have you noticed something off about them lately? They position themselves as reluctantly concerned rather than openly hostile. Cleans, who succeeded Zeno as head of the Stoic school, taught that we must distinguish between what others say and their true intentions. Actions, he insisted, reveal what words conceal. The strategic isolator's words express concern while their actions create your abandonment. They isolate you professionally by subtly questioning your judgment, your reliability, your very competence to perform. They isolate you socially by suggesting that your presence creates tension or discomfort for the group. They isolate you emotionally by implying that your reactions are disproportionate, unreasonable, or unhinged. And you're still operating under the delusion that this is just ordinary conflict that can be resolved with better communication. Keep trying to explain yourself, to clarify misunderstandings, to rebuild bridges that are being systematically torched before your eyes. This isn't optimism. This is self-destruction disguised as hope. Epictetus, who endured slavery before becoming a philosopher, understood power dynamics with brutal clarity. He taught, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." What's in your power isn't controlling others' campaigns against you. It's recognizing them for what they are and responding with appropriate boundaries. The strategic isolator doesn't want reconciliation. They don't want understanding. They want your complete removal from the spaces that matter, your influence eliminated, your voice silenced, your very presence erased from the equation. Take a moment now. Breathe into this recognition. Feel the weight of this truth settling into your awareness. Ask yourself, who consistently positions others against me? Who seems invested in limiting my access to groups, opportunities, or relationships? Who frames my exclusion as necessary for the comfort or productivity of others? This isn't ordinary dislike. This is systematic erasure. The fifth and perhaps most chilling sign someone wants you eliminated is narrative foreclosure. This goes beyond criticizing what you've done. This is actively limiting what you could ever be. This is the deliberate closing of your story, the predetermined conclusion that nothing good can come from your continued presence. When someone merely dislikes you, they may avoid your current self. When someone wants you eradicated, they work to ensure you have no future self. They don't just critique your past actions, they declare your future potential non-existent. They don't just identify current limitations, they pronounce them permanent and defining. The language of narrative foreclosure is absolute. They'll never change. That's just who they are. They're simply not capable. Notice how these statements contain no possibility of growth, learning, or transformation. They freeze you in amber, defined forever by your worst moments or limitations. The Roman Stoic Musonius Rufus insisted that we should not degrade ourselves through irrational opinions about our nature. Yet the person engaged in narrative foreclosure against you works precisely to install those degrading opinions not just in others, but in your own mind. They're not just criticizing you, they're authoring the conclusion of your story. They're not just identifying a current limitation, they're declaring it your permanent destiny. They're not just expressing disappointment in an action, they're pronouncing your character irredeemable. This form of attack is particularly devastating because it targets not just who you are, but who you might become. It aims to close off your future, to convince others and ultimately you that no investment in your development is worthwhile because the conclusion is already written. And you, still believing in the fundamental reasonableness of others, think, if I just show enough improvement, they'll change their mind. If I just work hard enough, they'll see my potential. If I just explain myself better, they'll understand. This isn't perseverance. This is self-harm disguised as determination. The Stoic philosopher Chrysippus taught that we must distinguish between what is truly within our control and what is not. You cannot control another's determination to foreclose your narrative. You can only recognize it for what it is and refuse to internalize its poison. Sit with this awareness now. Let it settle into your bones. The person engaged in narrative foreclosure against you doesn't just want you diminished, they want your future possibilities eliminated. Consider who consistently speaks about you in terms of permanent limitations, who seems invested in ensuring others see you as incapable of growth or change, who has already written the ending to your story and made sure it's one of failure, irrelevance, or harm. This isn't ordinary criticism. This is existential sentence. Now that you've identified these 5 deadly signs: systematic undermining, information weaponization, identity assassination, strategic isolation, and narrative foreclosure, what do you do with this knowledge? Your first reaction might be denial, then fear, then a desire for revenge. All understandable. all useless. The average person, upon recognizing these patterns, makes one of two catastrophic errors: either retreating into paralyzing fear and victimhood, or launching into destructive counter-aggression that only validates the narrative their opponent has created. Both responses play directly into your adversary's hands. The Stoics understood something essential about confronting existential threats. Your response must be governed not by emotion but by principle, not by reaction but by strategy, not by fear but by clarity. Epictetus, who understood oppression intimately, taught, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." This isn't passive acceptance, it's strategic focus. You cannot control another's campaign against you. You can control your response to it. Your first task is the hardest. You must accept the reality of your situation without being consumed by it. Most people fail here. They either refuse to believe the evidence before them, continuing to make excuses for those who seek their destruction, or they become obsessed with the threat, allowing it to dominate their every thought and action. Both paths lead to defeat. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journals, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." This isn't motivational fluff. This is survival wisdom from a man who navigated deadly political intrigue daily while running an empire. When you fully recognize that someone is working toward your elimination, not just your discomfort or your diminishment, but your complete removal, you must make a fundamental shift in how you orient yourself toward them. This isn't about hating them. Hatred clouds judgment, and clear judgment is your most precious resource. The shift required is from naivety to strategic clarity. Most people, raised on a diet of just be nice and everyone means well, find themselves defenseless against calculated malevolence. Their moral framework has no category for responding to existential opposition without either becoming the villain themselves or becoming the victim. The Stoics offer a third path: principled strength. Seneca advised, "Let us meet with bravery whatever may befall us. Let us never feel a shudder at the thought of being wounded, or of being made a prisoner, or of poverty or suffering." This isn't about becoming callous or unfeeling, it's about developing the internal fortitude to face reality without being broken by it. Your adversary expects you to follow one of two scripts: either continue in oblivious denial until it's too late, or discover their intentions and respond with such emotional reactivity that you discredit yourself. They've calculated for both possibilities. What they haven't calculated for is your transformation into someone who sees clearly, responds strategically, and refuses to be defined by either naivety or rage. This transformation begins with a brutal self-assessment. How have you been complicit in your own undermining? What weaknesses have you left exposed? What naive beliefs about fairness and everyone being basically good have left you vulnerable to calculated malevolence? Don't mistake this for victim blaming. This is about identifying the cracks in your foundation so you can repair them before the next earthquake hits. This is about recognizing that while you didn't cause another's malevolence, you may have been unconsciously enabling it. Ask yourself, where have you abandoned your own boundaries to appear reasonable? Where have you ignored your intuition to seem fair-minded? Where have you revealed vulnerabilities to people who have repeatedly demonstrated they aren't safe? These questions aren't comfortable. Growth never is. Musonius Rufus taught that we must undergo hardship and painful training to develop virtue. The painful training now is recognizing your own patterns that have left you exposed to those who wish you harm. Most people confronted with evidence that someone desires their elimination either collapse into helplessness or explode into uncontrolled aggression. Both responses stem from the same root: emotional reactivity rather than principled response. The Stoics understood that our power lies not in controlling others' actions toward us, but in controlling our responses to those actions. This isn't passive resignation, it's strategic positioning. Consider how you've been responding to the 5 deadly signs we've identified. Have you been making excuses for systematic undermining? Have you been oversharing with those who weaponize information? Have you been frantically defending yourself against identity assassination rather than simply demonstrating your character through action? Have you been desperately pursuing relationships with those working to isolate you? Have you been internalizing the narrative foreclosure others have projected onto you? These reactive patterns don't protect you, they accelerate your demise. The path forward isn't comfortable, but then again, comfort has never been the goal of a meaningful life. The Stoics understood that virtue, not ease, not popularity, not even safety, is the ultimate good, and virtue requires clear perception followed by principled action. Your new response begins with a mental shift so profound it will feel like speaking a new language. You must abandon the fantasy that everyone operates with the same basic moral framework you do. Some people have oriented their entire existence around dominance, control, and elimination of perceived threats. To them, your destruction isn't personal, it's simply what they do to maintain their position or feed their need for power. Epictetus, who endured enslavement before becoming a philosopher, understood this reality intimately. He taught, "Some things are within our power, while others are not." You cannot control another's intention to harm you. You can control your preparation, your boundaries, and your response. The first principle of strategic response is distance without drama. Most people, upon recognizing someone wishes them harm, either create unnecessary confrontation or remain dangerously close trying to fix the relationship. Both approaches increase vulnerability. Distance isn't about dramatic exits or public denouncements. It's about quietly recalibrating your engagement to minimize exposure while maintaining your dignity. It's not about broadcasting your awareness, it's about acting on it discreetly. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." Your adversary expects either continued naive engagement or dramatic confrontation. Your strategic distance confounds both expectations. This means no more oversharing with those who have demonstrated they weaponize information. No more defending yourself against identity assassination. Instead, simply demonstrate your character through consistent action. No more pursuing relationships with those working to isolate you. No more internalizing the narrative others have projected onto you. The second principle is strategic visibility. Your natural instinct might be to hide when targeted. This is exactly what your adversary hopes for. Instead, become strategically visible in ways that contradict their narrative while building your position. This isn't about direct confrontation, it's about making your value, character, and contributions undeniable to those who matter. When someone works to undermine you professionally, double down on measurable results. When they attack your character, demonstrate integrity consistently, but without fanfare. When they try to isolate you, build new alliances based on mutual value rather than emotional need. Seneca advised, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay." This applies equally to fear. When you feel the urgent need to defend yourself, to explain, to counterattack, pause. Strategic visibility isn't reactive, it's intentional. The third principle is fortress building. This isn't about walls of hostility, but about strengthening your position so thoroughly that attacks become ineffective. This means developing your skills beyond question, cultivating a diverse support network, maintaining impeccable records, and creating financial security. Most people try to fight fire with fire when targeted. The Stoic approach is to become fireproof. Musonius Rufus taught that we should train ourselves to want what is actually good for us rather than what merely appears good. What appears good is winning every battle. What is actually good is becoming invulnerable to the type of harm your adversary specializes in inflicting. If they undermine your professional credibility, document everything and build relationships with decision makers based on demonstrable results. If they weaponize personal information, practice radical discretion and develop the discipline of privacy. If they assassinate your character, let your consistent actions speak louder than their words. If they isolate you, develop multiple communities so no single sphere of influence can contain your banishment. The fourth principle is perception management. This isn't deception, it's the strategic control of what others can observe about your thoughts, plans, and vulnerabilities. The person working toward your elimination is studying you like a hunter studies prey. They track patterns, identify weaknesses, and look for predictable reactions they can exploit. Most people operating under the delusion that authenticity means total transparency reveal their every thought, plan, and insecurity. This isn't authenticity, it's recklessness in the presence of those who wish you harm. Epictetus advised, "Make it your practice to say to every harsh appearance, you are just an appearance and not at all what you appear to be." This applies equally to the appearances you present to others. You can be authentic in your principles while being strategic about what you reveal. This means practicing emotional discipline in triggering situations. It means planning privately and revealing only completed actions. It means presenting a studied calm that reveals nothing of your inner calculations. It means becoming, in essence, unreadable to those who read others to exploit them. The fifth principle is perhaps the most challenging: internal freedom. Your adversary seeks not just to limit your external circumstances, but to colonize your mind with fear, doubt, and preoccupation with their actions. They win completely when they occupy your thoughts, even in their absence. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his personal journals, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." This isn't motivational platitude, this is survival wisdom from a man who lived surrounded by potential betrayers while bearing the weight of an empire. The most devastating victory your adversary can achieve isn't your external downfall, it's the occupation of your mental territory. When they dominate your thoughts, hijack your emotional state, and become the central organizing principle around which your decisions revolve, they've achieved complete dominance without lifting a finger. Most people, upon recognizing they're being targeted, allow their opponent to colonize their mind completely. Every decision becomes about avoiding harm rather than creating value. Every conversation internally references the adversary. Every plan contains their shadow. This isn't vigilance, it's unconscious surrender. Epictetus taught, "Make it your study then to confront every harsh impression with the words, 'You are but an impression and not at all what you seem to be.'" This practice of mental discipline, recognizing threatening thoughts without being consumed by them, is your most powerful defense against psychological colonization. Your adversary wants you constantly reacting, defending, explaining, and obsessing. They want to live rent-free in your mind while you exhaust yourself fighting shadows. When you wake up thinking about them, plan your day around avoiding them, and go to sleep rehearsing conversations with them, they own you completely, regardless of external circumstances. Internal freedom begins with the recognition that while you cannot control their actions toward you, you retain absolute sovereignty over how much mental real estate they occupy. This isn't about pretending the threat doesn't exist, it's about proportional attention and strategic focus. Ask yourself, how many hours today did thoughts of this person occupy? How many decisions did you make with them as the reference point? How much creative energy did you divert to defending against or responding to them rather than building your own vision? The Stoics practiced a discipline called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, not to become obsessed with potential harm, but to remove its power to disturb their tranquility when it arrived. This isn't paranoia, it's preparation that frees you from reactive fear. Set specific, limited times to strategize about managing the relationship with your adversary. Outside those boundaries, practice ruthless redirection of your thoughts toward what you're building rather than what you're defending against. When they intrude on your consciousness outside designated times, recognize the thought without engaging it. That's just anxiety about X. I've already decided how to handle this situation. Internal freedom requires recognizing that your adversary wants to become the center of your emotional and mental universe. By refusing to grant them that position, by relegating them to a managed threat rather than an organizing principle, you achieve the victory they most want to deny you, the sovereignty of your own mind. This is perhaps your greatest act of defiance, to live with purpose and joy despite their intentions, to create value while they focus on destruction, to maintain tranquility while they churn with resentment, to grow while they stagnate in opposition to your existence. Seneca observed, "The mind that is anxious about future events is miserable." Your adversary counts on this anxiety to diminish you even before they act. When you reclaim your mental territory, when you refuse to live in anticipatory fear, you deny them their most desired outcome, your diminishment. Take a moment now. Breathe deeply. Feel the weight of these realizations. The path forward isn't elimination of the threat, it's transcendence of its power to define your internal state. Having established these 5 principles: distance without drama, strategic visibility, fortress building, perception management, and internal freedom, we now face the deepest question. How do you maintain your humanity while navigating existential opposition? The average person, upon recognizing these dynamics, makes one of 2 fundamental errors: either becoming consumed by bitterness and paranoia, or maintaining such rigid boundaries that they close themselves to all human connection. Both paths lead to the same destination: isolation and diminishment. The Stoics understood that virtue, not victory, not comfort, not even safety, must remain our highest aim. Virtue means maintaining your moral integrity even when confronting those who have abandoned theirs. It means responding to malevolence with clarity rather than matching malice. This isn't about becoming cold or calculating, it's about maintaining your humanity precisely when it's being tested most severely. It's about refusing to be transformed into a mirror image of what you oppose. This journey through the darkest terrain of human relationships demands more than ancient philosophy. It requires a clear-eyed understanding of modern psychology and the brutal realities of human nature. The uncomfortable truth is that certain personality types don't just compete with you, they fundamentally oppose your existence. They see your elimination, not your cooperation, as their goal. The psychology of destructive relationships isn't discussed in polite company. Society encourages us to believe in universal goodwill while ignoring the predatory dynamics that operate beneath social niceties. This collective denial leaves most people defenseless against calculated malevolence. Ask yourself honestly, how many times have you ignored your intuition about someone because you didn't want to seem judgmental? How often have you made excuses for behavior that felt fundamentally threatening? Modern psychological research confirms what your instincts have been telling you. Intuitive threat detection is a survival mechanism honed through evolution, not paranoia to be dismissed. Your body knows before your conscious mind catches up. That tension in your shoulders, that knot in your stomach, that sudden alertness when certain people enter your space, these aren't random anxieties. They're your threat detection system functioning exactly as designed. For too long, you've overridden these signals in the name of politeness, optimism, or avoiding conflict. This isn't sophistication, it's self-sabotage disguised as social grace. The concept of psychological safety has become popular in organizational psychology, but its inverse deserves equal attention: psychological danger. Some relationships aren't just uncomfortable, they're actively dangerous to your mental health, reputation, and ability to function. Contemporary research on workplace toxicity shows that targeted undermining doesn't just feel bad, it measurably destroys productivity, creativity, and even physical health. Studies on cortisol levels in hostile work environments reveal stress responses identical to those found in combat situations. This isn't hyperbole. Your body registers certain interpersonal threats as life or death situations because, evolutionarily speaking, social exclusion once meant exactly that. The cognitive dissonance you experience knowing something feels deeply wrong, while convincing yourself everything is fine, creates a psychological state called emotional splitting. You become divided against yourself, with your intuition screaming warnings, while your conscious mind manufactures explanations that preserve the comforting illusion of universal goodwill. This internal division exhausts you at a cellular level. It drains the energy needed for creativity, connection, and growth. It redirects your psychological resources from thriving to merely surviving, from creation to protection. Now, having recognized the 5 deadly signs: systematic undermining, information weaponization, identity assassination, strategic isolation, and narrative foreclosure, you face a critical choice. Will you continue participating in your own diminishment, or will you reclaim your power through strategic response? Modern psychological research on resilience indicates that the most effective response to targeted aggression isn't endless understanding or matching hostility. It's what psychologists call flexible boundaries with consistent enforcement. This means developing a responsive rather than reactive stance toward those who wish you harm. The foundation of this response is what neuropsychologists call metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own thoughts and emotional reactions without being hijacked by them. When you develop this capability, you can experience the natural fear, anger, or hurt that comes with being targeted without these emotions determining your actions. Research on emotional regulation shows that naming your emotional states specifically and accurately reduces their power to control your behavior. When someone triggers your threat response, silently identify exactly what you're feeling. This is fear of isolation, or this is anger at being misrepresented. This cognitive labeling activates your prefrontal cortex, bringing online the brain regions responsible for strategic thinking rather than reactive behavior. Most people, when threatened, default to their limbic system, the primitive brain structures governing fight or flight responses. This neurological hijacking makes you predictable to those who wish you harm. They can reliably trigger your defensive reactions, then use those very reactions as evidence against you. Break this pattern through what neuropsychologists call the pause, the deliberately cultivated gap between stimulus and response. When provoked, train yourself to pause, breathe, and observe your automatic reaction without immediately acting on it. This isn't passivity, it's strategic self-control that preserves your power to choose your response rather than have it chosen for you by your adversary's provocations. The research on narcissistic aggression and psychopathic targeting provides further insight. Those who systematically undermine others typically expect either continued naive engagement or explosive reaction. Their strategy depends on your predictability. By choosing a third path, neither naive trust nor reactive hostility, you introduce an element they haven't planned for. This third path, strategic disengagement, isn't about dramatic confrontation or passive surrender. It's about recalibrating your engagement to minimize vulnerability while maximizing your agency. Modern psychological research on high-conflict personalities confirms what you've likely experienced. Direct confrontation often escalates rather than resolves the situation, while continued normal engagement leaves you exposed to calculated harm. Strategic disengagement means minimizing your psychological and informational exposure without announcing your awareness or intentions. It means becoming selectively unavailable, intentionally opaque, and deliberately unpredictable to those who have demonstrated hostile intent. Look at the patterns in your current situation honestly. Have you been oversharing with someone who consistently uses your information against you? Have you been explaining yourself to someone who deliberately misunderstands? Have you been seeking approval from someone who has demonstrated they're invested in your failure? These behaviors aren't optimism, they're self-sabotage rooted in denial. One of the most insidious psychological mechanisms used against you is projection, the unconscious attribution of unacceptable personal qualities onto others. The person accusing you of being manipulative is often engaged in manipulation themselves. The one questioning your hidden agenda typically has their own. The individual constantly raising concerns about your trustworthiness is frequently the least trustworthy person in the room. Psychological research on projection indicates that people most readily accuse others of their own shadow traits, the behaviors they engage in but cannot consciously acknowledge. When you understand this mechanism, the repeated accusations against you become valuable intelligence about your accuser, not accurate reflections of your character. Closely related to projection is gaslighting, the systematic attempt to make you question your own perception, memory, and sanity. The phrase "that never happened," or "you're being too sensitive," or "no one else sees it that way," are hallmarks of this psychological manipulation. Contemporary research on gaslighting reveals its devastating impact on cognitive function. When repeatedly told your perceptions are wrong, your brain enters a state of confusion and self-doubt that impairs decision-making and drains mental energy. This isn't weakness, it's a predictable neurological response to contradictory information from trusted sources. The antidote to gaslighting isn't argumentation, but documentation. Record interactions, save emails, take notes after conversations. This isn't paranoia, it's self-protection in environments where reality itself becomes contested territory. External validation of your experiences provides critical cognitive anchoring when someone works to destabilize your perception. Perhaps the most painful aspect of realizing someone wants you eliminated rather than merely disliked is the inevitable isolation that accompanies this awareness. Others who haven't experienced targeted aggression often respond with disbelief, discomfort, or dismissal when you attempt to discuss it. This secondary trauma, the invalidation of your experience by potential supporters, can be as damaging as the primary targeting. Research on trauma psychology indicates that validation of experience is crucial to recovery and resilience. Without external confirmation that what you're experiencing is real, you become vulnerable to what psychologists call reality testing failure, the progressive inability to trust your own perceptions in the face of consistent contradiction. This is why building what social psychologists call reality-affirming relationships becomes critical when facing targeted aggression. These are connections with people who can see the dynamics clearly and confirm your perceptions without either minimizing the threat or catastrophizing it. They provide both emotional support and cognitive anchoring when your reality is under attack. The psychology behind extreme animosity often involves what researchers call malignant envy, not the benign envy that motivates improvement, but the destructive variant that seeks to eliminate the envied qualities or achievements rather than emulate them. People experiencing malignant envy don't want what you have, they want to ensure you no longer have it. This explains the puzzling situation where someone seems to gain nothing tangible from your downfall, yet pursues it relentlessly. Their goal isn't rational advancement of their interests, but psychological relief from the pain your success or qualities cause them. Understanding this mechanism helps you stop searching for logical motivations behind seemingly irrational hostility. Research on organizational psychology and workplace bullying identifies a particularly dangerous variant called predatory bullying aggression, not provoked by anything the target has done but motivated by the aggressor's need to demonstrate power by destroying someone perceived as vulnerable. Unlike reactive aggression, which responds to perceived threats, predatory aggression selects targets based on their value, visibility, or vulnerability. If you found yourself targeted despite doing nothing to provoke aggression, this mechanism may explain your experience. The targeting isn't about you, it's about what you represent in the mind of the aggressor. This understanding, while difficult to accept, liberates you from the exhausting search for what you did wrong to deserve such treatment. The psychological insight you're avoiding most desperately is the reality of trauma bonding, the powerful attachment that forms precisely with those who harm you most consistently. This unconscious mechanism explains why you keep making excuses for someone who has demonstrated clear intent to harm you. The intermittent reinforcement of occasional kindness amid consistent undermining creates a biochemical addiction more powerful than continuous positive treatment. Research on abusive relationships reveals a disturbing pattern. The deeper the injury, the more victims often defend their abusers. This isn't weakness, it's a neurobiological response to inconsistent treatment. The unpredictable alternation between approval and destruction creates a dopamine-driven attachment loop that keeps you psychologically tethered to your destroyer. This explains your most baffling behavior, why you continue seeking validation from the very person working most consistently to undermine you. Each rare moment of approval creates a neurochemical high that your brain craves with increasing desperation as the treatment worsens. This isn't hope, it's addiction masquerading as optimism. Ask yourself honestly, do you find yourself obsessively seeking approval from someone who consistently withholds it? Do you feel an overwhelming sense of validation when they occasionally offer positive feedback, only to crash into despair when they inevitably withdraw it? Do you remember their rare moments of kindness with perfect clarity while struggling to acknowledge their consistent pattern of harm? These aren't signs of forgiveness or sophisticated understanding, they're symptoms of a psychological attachment mechanism that evolved to keep children bonded to inconsistent caregivers for survival. In adulthood, this same mechanism keeps you tethered to those who replicate these destructive patterns. Breaking a trauma bond requires more than intellectual recognition. It demands neurobiological reprogramming. Research on addiction recovery provides the framework. You must go through psychological withdrawal by completely removing the source of intermittent reinforcement. This explains why cutting contact isn't melodramatic overreaction, but neurological necessity when dealing with someone who has demonstrated intent to harm you. Closely related to trauma bonding is cognitive dissonance, the mental distress that occurs when your beliefs contradict your experiences. When someone you've categorized as friend or mentor or supportive colleague demonstrates clear harmful intent, your brain faces an unbearable contradiction. Rather than revise your categorization of the person, your mind often distorts your perception of their behavior. This is why you keep searching for misunderstandings when someone repeatedly undermines you. It's why you attribute good intentions to actions that consistently harm you. Your brain is protecting itself from the psychological damage of recognizing that someone you trusted is actively working against you. Contemporary cognitive psychology identifies several distortion patterns that maintain this dangerous self-deception. Minimization. It wasn't really that bad. Rationalization. They're just stressed/insecure/ going through something difficult. Selective attention. Focusing on rare positive interactions while ignoring consistent negative patterns. Mind reading. They didn't mean it that way despite evidence to the contrary. Emotional reasoning. I feel guilty setting boundaries, therefore I must be wrong to do so. These distortions aren't sophisticated understanding, they're psychological defense mechanisms that leave you vulnerable to continued harm. The path forward requires what trauma psychologists call radical acceptance, the complete acknowledgement of reality without minimization or distortion. This means accepting the painful truth that someone has oriented themselves against your well-being, not because of anything you did or failed to do, but because of their own internal landscape. This acceptance isn't about assigning blame or feeding resentment. It's about seeing reality accurately so you can respond effectively. It's about ending the exhausting mental gymnastics of making excuses for someone who has demonstrated through consistent patterns that they intend your diminishment or elimination. Once you fully accept this reality, the necessary actions become clear, if not easy. Research on recovery from targeted aggression outlines a consistent pathway. First, implement what psychologists call functional distance, the strategic reduction of exposure without dramatic announcement. This isn't about confrontation, it's about quietly recalibrating your engagement to minimize vulnerability. Reduce information sharing, emotional investment, and dependency while maintaining professional composure. Second, build what trauma researchers call islands of safety relationships and environments where you can express yourself fully without fear of exploitation or attack. These aren't escape hatches, they're regenerative spaces where you can recover your psychological equilibrium and reconnect with your capabilities outside the distorting lens of targeted aggression. Third, develop what resilient psychology calls selective disclosure, the strategic choice about what parts of yourself, your plans, and your vulnerabilities you reveal to whom. This isn't deception, it's appropriate boundary setting in environments where information has been weaponized against you. Fourth, practice what psychologists call strategic self-presentation. the conscious management of how you appear to those who have demonstrated hostile intent. This isn't about becoming someone you're not. It's about controlling which aspects of yourself you make visible in unsafe environments. When someone studies you for vulnerabilities, become strategically opaque, revealing only what serves your protection. One of the most powerful psychological weapons used against you is triangulation, the manipulation of communication between you and others to create conflict, confusion, and isolation. The person targeting you doesn't confront you directly. They work through third parties, saying different things to different people to create maximum discord. Research on high conflict personalities shows that triangulation serves multiple strategic purposes. It isolates you from potential allies, creates an environment of constant mistrust, and allows the aggressor to maintain a positive public image while doing maximum damage behind the scenes. The signature pattern of triangulation is hearing second-hand accounts of conversations about you that never reach you directly. "I thought you should know what they're saying" becomes the toxic delivery mechanism for information designed to destabilize your relationships and self-perception. The most effective counter to triangulation isn't defensive explanation or counter-gossip. It's what communication psychologists call direct engagement with transparent boundaries. When you hear something secondhand, respond with calm clarity. "I appreciate you sharing that concern. The most constructive approach would be for them to discuss it with me directly. I'm always open to direct communication." This response does three things simultaneously. It demonstrates your openness to feedback, establishes your expectation for direct communication, and gently discourages the triangulation pattern without attacking anyone involved. Over time, this consistent response dismantles the triangulation mechanism without feeding the drama it's designed to create. Closely related to triangulation is what social psychologists call flying monkey behavior, the recruitment of others to do the dirty work of targeting you. Named after the Wicked Witch's minions in The Wizard of Oz, these individuals may not have their own animus against you, but act as proxy attackers for the primary aggressor. The psychology behind this behavior involves both social influence and what researchers call moral disengagement, the process of convincing oneself that harmful actions are justified when done on behalf of someone else. The primary aggressor often frames their targeting as protection. "I'm just trying to warn people about them," or justice. They need to be held accountable, giving recruits a righteous narrative to justify harmful behavior. What makes this dynamic particularly disorienting is that people you've never directly conflicted with suddenly become hostile toward you. This seemingly illogical aggression makes you question your reality. What did I do to this person? Why do they seem to hate me when we've barely interacted? Understanding the flying monkey phenomenon provides critical clarity. Their hostility isn't based on direct experience with you, but on a narrative they've been fed by the primary aggressor. This recognition helps you avoid the exhausting process of trying to resolve conflicts that don't actually originate with the people expressing them. The most effective response to flying monkey behavior isn't confrontation or defense, it's what psychologists call disarming neutrality. When someone approaches with second-hand grievances or suspiciously detailed concerns about you, respond with calm curiosity. "That's interesting feedback. What specifically did you observe that concerned you?" This question gently reveals whether their concerns come from direct observation or implanted narrative. Perhaps the most powerful psychological strategy against those who target you is becoming what therapists call strategically boring to your adversary. Research on high conflict personalities reveals a consistent pattern. They feed on emotional reactivity. Your visible distress, defensive explanations, and attempts to correct their narratives provide the emotional fuel that sustains their campaign against you. By systematically depriving them of this emotional reaction, you become progressively less interesting as a target. This isn't about becoming emotionless, it's about containing your natural reactions to provocations so they're not visible to those who would weaponize them against you. The psychology of becoming strategically boring involves a practice called gray rock method, responding to provocations with the emotional flatness and interest value of a gray rock. When someone baits you with accusations, provocative statements, or subtle digs, you respond with neutral acknowledgement rather than defensive explanation or emotional reaction. This method works because psychological research shows that targeted aggression operates on a reinforcement schedule. When provocations consistently fail to produce the desired emotional response, they eventually diminish through a process behavioral psychologists call extinction. This isn't immediate, in fact. The aggression often temporarily intensifies, called an extinction burst, before subsiding when it consistently fails to produce results. Understanding this pattern is crucial to maintaining your strategy during the most difficult phase. When your lack of emotional reactivity initially produces increased targeting, the natural conclusion is that your approach isn't working. This misinterpretation leads many people to abandon the very strategy that would eventually succeed just before it would begin to show results. Developmental psychology offers another insight. The motivation behind targeted elimination often stems from what researchers call pathological envy, a psychological state distinct from ordinary jealousy or competition. While healthy envy motivates self-improvement, I want what you have and will work to achieve it. Pathological envy seeks to destroy what it cannot possess. If I can't have what you have, no one should. This explains the puzzling situation where someone targets you despite gaining no apparent benefit from your downfall. Their goal isn't rational advancement, but psychological relief. Your accomplishments, qualities, or relationships cause them such internal distress that your elimination becomes their primary focus, not because it benefits them materially, but because it alleviates their psychological pain. This understanding is liberating because it removes the exhausting question that keeps you awake at night. What did I do to deserve this? The truthful answer is often nothing beyond existing in a way that triggers someone else's internal wounds. Their targeting isn't about your failures, but your qualities, not your weaknesses, but your strengths. Research on workplace psychology reveals another critical insight, what organizational psychologists call the threat rigidity effect. When humans feel threatened, our cognitive flexibility decreases precisely when we need it most. We default to familiar patterns even when those patterns make the situation worse. This explains why, when targeted, you often find yourself stuck in ineffective response loops, defending when defense feeds the narrative against you, oversharing when discretion would protect you, pursuing approval from those committed to denying it. These aren't character flaws, they're predictable neurological responses to perceived threats. Breaking these automatic response patterns requires what neuropsychologists call pattern interruption, deliberately inserting a new response at the moment your brain defaults to its familiar but unhelpful reaction. When the urge to defend, explain, or seek approval arises, consciously insert a different response: strategic silence, calm curiosity, or simple disengagement. This pattern interruption initially feels wrong, almost physically painful, because it contradicts your brain's established threat response. The discomfort isn't evidence that the new approach is incorrect. It's your neurological system resisting recalibration. Research on habit formation shows that this discomfort diminishes with repetition as your brain establishes new default responses. The psychology of recovery from targeted aggression involves what trauma researchers call post-traumatic growth, the positive psychological changes that sometimes occur as a result of struggling with highly challenging life circumstances. While no one would choose to be targeted, the experience often forces developmental leaps that wouldn't otherwise occur. Research on resilience shows that surviving targeted aggression frequently produces specific psychological strengths: enhanced boundary clarity, improved people reading abilities, greater self-reliance, and more authentic relationship selection. These aren't mere consolation prizes, they're genuine evolutionary adaptations that serve you long after the immediate threat has passed. This post-traumatic growth doesn't happen automatically. It requires what psychologists call meaning-making, the conscious process of extracting lessons and insights from difficult experiences rather than simply enduring them. Ask yourself, what has this experience taught you about your own boundaries, about the importance of trusting your intuition, about the kind of environments and relationships that allow you to thrive? The answers form the foundation of what trauma psychologists call your survivor narrative, the story you tell yourself about what happened and how it shaped you. This narrative determines whether you emerge from targeting feeling permanently damaged or profoundly strengthened. The psychology of crafting your survivor narrative demands brutal honesty. Most people construct stories that either minimize their suffering, "it wasn't that bad," or maximize their victimhood, "I'll never recover from what they did." Both narratives keep you trapped, the first in continued vulnerability, the second in permanent damage. Research on trauma recovery shows that the most empowering narrative acknowledges the full reality of what happened while emphasizing your agency in response. This happened to me. It was real, it was wrong, and it affected me deeply. And I used this experience to become stronger, clearer, and more authentic than I was before. This narrative construction isn't denial or toxic positivity. It's what psychologists call redemptive sequencing, finding meaning and growth without minimizing harm. The key psychological distinction is between happening to and defining. What happened to you is real, but it doesn't define your future unless you surrender that power. Most people unconsciously adopt what psychologists call a contamination narrative, the belief that once something painful touches your life, everything afterward is tainted by it. Research on resilience shows that the alternative, a redemption narrative, where difficulty leads to growth, is not just psychologically healthier, but more factually accurate in predicting long-term outcomes. The transformation from target to thriver begins with understanding what psychologists call the oscillation model of recovery. This research-backed framework reveals that healing isn't linear. It alternates between confronting the reality of what happened and strategically distancing from it to rebuild your life. This oscillation isn't weakness or avoidance. It's the natural rhythm of psychological integration. Some days you need to process the targeting through reflection, therapy, or conversation. Other days you need to focus entirely on creating your future without reference to what happened. Both modes are necessary, and consciously choosing which mode serves you in a given moment represents the essence of reclaiming your agency. What most people don't understand about recovery from targeted elimination attempts is the critical importance of what trauma psychologists call mastery experiences, concrete achievements that rebuild your sense of capability after it's been systematically attacked. These aren't necessarily grand accomplishments. They're evidence of your impact on your environment that directly contradicts the narrative of incompetence or unworthiness your adversary constructed. Set small, achievable goals that demonstrate your capabilities to yourself. Each completion rebuilds neural pathways of confidence and agency that targeted aggression specifically works to destroy. This isn't distraction, it's neurological reconstruction. The psychology of boundaries after experiencing targeted elimination attempts requires understanding what researchers call the pendulum effect. When people first recognize they've been too permeable, they often swing to rigid isolation before finding healthy middle ground. This temporary rigidity isn't failure or overreaction, it's a necessary recalibration phase. Allow yourself this protective rigidity without shame or self-judgment. Research shows that boundaries naturally become more flexible once your sense of safety and discernment has been restored. The temporary fortress around your life isn't your final destination. It's the secure base from which you'll eventually re-engage on your terms. Perhaps the most important psychological insight for thriving after targeting is understanding the difference between what trauma researchers call hypervigilance and strategic awareness. Hypervigilance is the exhausting state of scanning for threats in all directions constantly, a natural response to having been blindsided, but one that prevents full engagement with life. Strategic awareness, by contrast, is the calibrated attention to actual risk indicators without the constant background radiation of anxiety. It's the difference between thinking, "everyone might be against me," and "I know the specific patterns that indicate hostility, and I can recognize them without obsessing about them." This transformation from hypervigilance to strategic awareness represents the essence of post-traumatic growth after targeting. You don't return to naive trust, but neither do you remain trapped in paralyzing suspicion. You develop what psychologists call realistic optimism, the capacity to engage openly with life while maintaining accurate threat assessment. The warning signs that someone wants you eliminated rather than merely disliked often register in your body before your conscious mind can process them. Research on trauma responses shows that physical sensations, tension, nausea, racing heart, sudden fatigue often signal threat detection happening below conscious awareness. Modern trauma psychology has confirmed what you've likely experienced. Your body keeps the score. Those unexplained symptoms when certain people are around, the tightness in your chest, the knot in your stomach, the sudden headache, the overwhelming fatigue, these aren't random malfunctions. They're your body's sophisticated alert system functioning exactly as designed. Research on somatic responses to threat shows that your nervous system often identifies danger long before your conscious mind can articulate it. That voice in your head making excuses for someone's behavior might be easily fooled, but your autonomic nervous system operates on pattern recognition honed through evolution. It doesn't care about social niceties or appearing reasonable. It cares about keeping you alive. The tragedy is how systematically you've been trained to override these warning signals. From childhood, you were likely taught that physical symptoms are just in your head, or that anxiety isn't a reason to avoid situations. This well-meaning but dangerous advice taught you to dismiss your most reliable threat detection system. This disconnect between bodily wisdom and conscious override explains why you've remained in harmful situations long after your body screamed for escape. It's why you keep making excuses for people who make you physically ill with their presence. It's why you dismiss as just anxiety what is actually your most sophisticated survival mechanism. Reclaiming this bodily intelligence requires what somatic psychologists call interoceptive awareness, the conscious attention to internal physical states without immediate reinterpretation or dismissal. When your body signals distress in someone's presence, practice acknowledging the sensation without immediately explaining it away. My chest is tightening. I notice my breathing has become shallow. My shoulders are rising toward my ears. This simple practice of acknowledgement begins to rebuild the severed connection between your somatic wisdom and conscious awareness. You don't need to immediately act on these signals, but you must stop dismissing them if you want to accurately identify who truly wishes you harm. The critical distinction most people fail to make is between genuine intuition and anxious rumination. Research on intuitive processing shows that true intuition has specific characteristics. It arrives quickly and clearly, often with physical accompaniment, and typically points toward action rather than endless questioning. Anxiety, by contrast, spirals in repeating loops without resolution, physically manifests as constriction rather than directional energy, and typically paralyzes rather than motivates action. Learning to distinguish between these two internal experiences is essential for accurately identifying genuine threats without falling into paranoia. When your body suddenly tenses in someone's presence, that's intuition worth heeding. When you lie awake rehearsing conversations and imagining scenarios for hours, that's anxiety worth managing. The first is your threat detection system functioning properly. The second is your mind trapped in an unproductive stress response. Research on human deception detection reveals a disturbing truth. Most people perform barely better than chance at consciously identifying lies, yet show physical stress responses that accurately indicate when they're being deceived. In other words, your body knows when someone is lying to you, even when your mind is successfully fooled. This explains the cognitive dissonance you experience with certain people intellectually accepting their explanations while physically contracting in their presence. This isn't confusion, it's conflict between your conscious processing and your more accurate embodied knowledge. The body's wisdom extends beyond immediate threat detection to what researchers call social baseline theory, your nervous system's calibration of safety in particular social environments. When someone consistently causes your nervous system to enter a threat state, your body is identifying a pattern your conscious mind might excuse or rationalize. Pay particular attention to how quickly your body relaxes when certain people leave a room. That instant relief isn't coincidence or imagination. It's your nervous system accurately recognizing the removal of a threat your conscious mind may still be defending or excusing. The psychological mechanisms that keep you vulnerable to those who want you eliminated rather than merely disliked involve what researchers call cognitive biases, systematic errors in thinking that occur in specific situations. Understanding these biases is crucial to breaking free from their influence. The most insidious bias keeping you vulnerable is what psychologists call the just world fallacy, the deep-seated belief that people generally get what they deserve. This cognitive error makes you search for reasons why you deserve mistreatment, rather than accepting the uncomfortable reality that targeted aggression often has nothing to do with your actions and everything to do with what you represent to your aggressor. Closely related is fundamental attribution error, the tendency to explain others' harmful behavior through circumstantial factors they're just stressed, while explaining your own reactions as character flaws. I'm too sensitive. This imbalanced attribution keeps you making excuses for those targeting you while harshly judging your natural responses to being targeted. Perhaps most dangerous is normalcy bias, the cognitive tendency to minimize threat cues that contradict your expectation of normality. This explains why you keep reinterpreting clear warning signs to fit your preferred narrative that everything is fundamentally okay. Your brain would rather distort reality than update its understanding of your situation. Breaking free from these cognitive distortions requires what psychologists call metacognitive awareness, the ability to think critically about your own thinking patterns. When you catch yourself making excuses for someone's harmful behavior, pause and ask, am I explaining away evidence to maintain a comfortable belief? What if I took this evidence at face value? Now, having recognized the 5 deadly signs that distinguish existential opposition from mere dislike, you stand at a critical threshold. The path forward isn't about becoming paranoid or seeing enemies everywhere. It's about developing what psychologists call calibrated trust, based on behavior patterns rather than wishful thinking. Remember these signs clearly. When someone engages in systematic undermining, consistently removing your foundations of support rather than merely criticizing you, they're signaling intent to eliminate, not just oppose. When someone practices information weaponization, collecting and strategically deploying your vulnerabilities, mistakes, and private disclosures, they're working toward your destruction, not your improvement. When someone pursues identity assassination, attacking your fundamental character rather than specific behaviors, they're seeking to erase your essence, not correct your course. When someone implements strategic isolation, systematically separating you from support systems rather than simply withdrawing their own support, they're engineering your removal, not your growth. When someone enforces narrative foreclosure, declaring your story permanently defined by limitation rather than acknowledging capacity for change, they're eliminating your future, not challenging your present. These patterns, especially when occurring together, reveal an intent far more dangerous than ordinary dislike. They represent the systematic effort to remove you as an entity professionally, socially, psychologically, or in the most extreme cases, physically. Your response must be equally systematic but fundamentally different in nature. While they seek to destroy, you must seek to build. While they operate from hatred, you must operate from clarity. While they pursue your elimination, you must pursue your evolution into someone their strategies cannot touch. This means implementing concrete protection strategies. First, practice strategic silence, carefully evaluating what information deserves your response and what provocations are better met with calculated non-engagement. When someone is collecting your reactions as weapons, depriving them of new ammunition becomes your first defense. Second, build documentation habits, creating a clear record of interactions, agreements, and incidents that prevents reality distortion. This isn't paranoia, it's protection against the gaslighting that inevitably accompanies targeted elimination efforts. Third, develop support diversification, ensuring that no single person or group has monopoly power over your sense of validation, opportunity, or belonging. When your emotional and professional survival requires multiple points of connection, strategic isolation loses its power. Fourth, implement controlled visibility, consciously deciding what aspects of yourself, your work, and your life remain accessible to those who have demonstrated hostile intent. This isn't deception but appropriate boundary setting in the face of demonstrated threat. Finally, maintain identity reinforcement, consistently reconnecting with your core values, strengths, and purpose outside the distorted narratives others create. When your sense of self is internally anchored rather than externally defined, identity assassination attempts lose their devastating impact. The journey from target to thriver isn't simple or linear. There will be days when old patterns reassert themselves, when self-doubt clouds your clarity, when the sheer exhaustion of vigilance tempts you to surrender to comfortable denial. This isn't failure, it's the natural rhythm of profound transformation. What matters isn't perfection but direction. Every time you honor your intuition instead of overriding it, you strengthen the connection to your most reliable protection system. Every time you maintain a boundary instead of abandoning it for approval, you rebuild the internal security that targeted aggression specifically aims to destroy. The ultimate victory isn't destroying your opponent. It's becoming someone whose sense of self, purpose, and value exists entirely beyond their reach. Someone whose clarity can't be clouded by manipulation, whose boundaries can't be breached by guilt, whose future can't be foreclosed by another's limitation. This transformation doesn't make you cold, paranoid, or isolated. Quite the opposite, it allows for deeper connection with those worthy of your trust, more authentic expression of your gifts, and fuller engagement with the possibilities that await beyond the shadow of those who wished for your elimination. The world contains both those who will celebrate your light and those who will work to extinguish it. The wisdom lies not in pretending everyone wishes you well, but in accurately distinguishing between the two while refusing to let either define the essence of who you are and what you're capable of becoming. The path forward isn't forgetting what you've learned or surrendering to permanent suspicion. It's building a life so aligned with your authentic power that those who once sought your elimination become irrelevant to your story, not because you defeated them, but because you outgrew the battlefield entirely. Your future belongs to you. Claim it with clear eyes, protected boundaries, and the unshakable knowledge that those who wished for your erasure have instead catalyzed your evolution into someone far stronger, clearer, and more powerful than you ever would have become without the challenge they presented. This is the ultimate transformation, not from victim to victor, but from target to creator of your boundaries, your connections, your impact, and ultimately, your life on your own unapologetic terms. Thanks for staying until the end. Do not forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon.